Hey guys, I wanted to try something a bit different today. We have these beautiful crane flowers that have just come out in the garden, otherwise known as bird of paradise flowers, and also strelitzias. So they grow naturally in this part of the world, and I just think they're one of the most spectacular flowers to look at. So we're lucky to have so many of them in the garden, and I thought I'd take this subject matter and try out 3 different ways of sketching it. I thought this might inspire you to try out your own experiments with different sketching methods and materials. So in this first sketch, I am approaching the crane flower by using just watercolor, so watercolor only. So I kind of feel out the shape on my paper, and I'm kind of adding water first to create the shape. And so I'm almost like painting with the water, and then I'm just dabbing in the colors that I want in those areas, but also just kind of letting them bleed into each other a bit as well. And I recently picked this technique up from watercolor artist Andrew Geeson, not sure which one, and was keen to try it out. So he's very much into kind of doing like loose watercolors, and I was watching one of his courses, and yeah, he was just like, just dab in the pigment, don't force it around, don't try and spread it around with a brush, just dab it into the areas and let it do its own thing. So that's kind of what I was going for here. And in this demonstration of this watercolor only sketch, I'm using the A4 landscape orientation sketchbook from Etcher, which has 100% cotton paper. I've had this sketchbook for a long time, but I've been feeling a bit tentative to use it as it was quite pricey. And, as such, I've actually just ended up doing tentative looking half finished sketches in it. So I should probably just get over myself and just delve in. This sketchbook has cold press paper, which has got quite a lot of texture to it, and therefore it's not as easy to do ink drawings in. I recently actually got the smaller hot press version, and if any of you saw the One Street Two Styles where I was sketching Victoria Street in Edinburgh, that's the sketchbook I was using in that video, and I am preferring the hot press paper just for my personal style. And I also think that A5 size suits me better as well. I feel like less intimidated to use it and like carry it around with me and stuff like that. While some of this first sketch or painting here is drying, I am actually going in and sort of trying out different sketches to the side of it and trying out different angles of the crane flower. Luckily I can see the flowers very clearly outside of my window, so I was just looking up and trying out some alternative angles and shapes. I wasn't sure how I felt about my main painting at the time, but actually once it had fully dried and sort of finished doing what it was doing in terms of spreading the pigment out and stuff like that, I looked at it sort of later on and I actually quite liked it. It's definitely a fun and quick technique to try out, so I highly recommend giving this a go. Okay, so moving on to sketch 2. For sketch 2, I wanted to try something different again. Obviously, I'm trying to do different styles, different materials, that kind of thing. So I drew the basic shapes of the crane flower in pencil first, and then I moved on to paint the big shapes in basic colours of watercolour that I wanted in those areas. In this particular sketch, I have switched my paper and I have moved on to using just a cartridge sketch pad, to be honest. So I think it's a Cass Art's own brand. They're a art store in the UK, and it's just 200 GSM and it is cartridge paper. So I just thought maybe let's just see if watercolor works okay on this paper, and it actually does a pretty good job, to be honest with you. And the paper's nice and smooth as well, so it's nice to draw on. And I knew in this sketch I wanted to use watercolor pencils, so that's why I was sort of hunting around for some smooth paper, as I prefer using watercolor pencils on smoother paper. And by the way, for all 3 sketches that I'm doing today, I am using the Etcher watercolor set. Just had some of the perfect colours already in pan form for this particular flower, particularly the oranges. So I just opted for the more convenient, some may say lazy, route of using the colours straight out of the pan. And this may be why the sketches all look quite bright, and I guess some may say unrefined, but I quite like the bright graphic pop contrasty sketches rather than kind of delicate realistic stuff. That's just kind of what comes out of me naturally. So I cracked out my Lyra Rembrandt watercolour pencils along with my Derwent Inktense pencils, and yes, I know they're not traditional watercolour pencils. I know that now. I've made that mistake before, but they do somewhat work in the same way. And I just sort of built up some layers of contrast, working up the shadow areas, just to give a bit more sense of depth and dimension. I feel like I definitely could have gone further in this sketch and pushed things a bit more. I'm not sure I was really liking my greens particularly. Again, I was somewhat lazy, and there's a few different greens in this set, so I was kind of using them straight from the pan, or maybe just slightly mixing them with other colours. And yeah, I mean, using greens straight from the pan, apparently this never really leads to a very satisfying result. Most people will tell you never to use a green from the pan and actually just to mix one. So, but yeah, I don't know. The crane flowers have got quite a distinctive green leaf. It's definitely a cold green. So yeah, I knew I wasn't really going to get a defeatist attitude straight away. I knew I wasn't going to get a green that I was totally happy with. So yeah, I was just trying to experiment with it. But I'm very happy with how the watercolor pencils were layering on top of the painting. And that's why I kept the basic shapes quite a flat watercolor, a flat color to start with, because then I knew I was going to build up the shades and the interest with the watercolor pencils, which, yeah, it's just something I don't really ever do. So this was quite an interesting little experiment to try out. I quite like the sort of pink flower that's kind of leaning out the back of the main flower. I thought that had some interesting kind of colour play in it. And I do like the sense of depth though I was starting to get around the bottom of the green part of the flower there. And yeah, I think I could definitely push this a bit further, but it was a useful study and an experiment to sort of build upon later on. And, you know, that's always a good purpose of sketches in your sketchbook, to just kind of figure things out. So now I feel a bit more confident about what I can achieve with this method. I definitely want to, yeah, use this a bit more in future. Okay, so moving on to sketch 3. I am going to go a bit wild in this one, but stick with me. I am using the same pad of paper in the previous demonstration, so that's the 200 GSM cartridge paper pad, and I'm going straight in with my Sailor Fude fountain pen. That's the one with the bent nib at the end that you can achieve a variable line weight with, and I am just inking in the rough outline of the flower. I'm not being too careful, I'm being pretty loose and just kind of going for it. Once I've put my pen lines in, I'm just sort of wetting a bit of the area of the flower and just going in with a bit of paint, not quite dabbing it like I did in the first one, definitely sort of painting in a bit more, but again trying to get those colours just to bleed into each other, because I think these flowers in particular, they don't have hard lines or definition where the colours change, and it does kind of gradually merge or blend from one colour to another. So I think a wet and wet approach with flowers in particular is really quite useful. And to start with there, I was using my White Nights watercolour set before I moved to the Etcher set, just to be lazy and use those oranges again, because they were just the perfect colour for this flower. I mean, I don't really have anything in my White Nights set that could really replicate that kind of orange, to be honest with you. I could have tried mixing the bright red I have in the set with my Indian yellow, but the Indian yellow isn't like a really pure bright yellow. It's kind of, I don't know, it's kind of like a dirty yellow or like an ochre yellow. So I don't think it would have got to the right kind of orange that I wanted for this sketch. And also sometimes when you're working wet and wet and you haven't planned things too well beforehand, you do actually just need to do things quickly. So if you've got a colour there that just works, then it's just like, let's just go for it. So once dry, I go in with a smaller brush to emphasize some of the shadow areas. And then I reach for my trusty Unipin fine liner. And by the way, none of this is pre-planned. I'm just making it up as I go along. And that tends to be what I do in these kinds of demonstrations. And I just tell myself if it just turns into a disaster, then I won't use it. But I'll just always 9 times out of 10 I try and film whatever I'm doing, just so that if something does work out, A, I can remember it, and B, if it's reasonable enough, if it's good enough, I'll show you guys as well and help to prompt your inspiration and experimentation vibes as well. So I've no idea really what the end result of this sketch is going to be and if it's going to be any good, and by that I mean whether I personally will like what I've done. With the uni pin, I'm just sort of going in, I'm doing some random hatching in areas, and then I decide I need to fill the scene out a bit, rather than just being this singular flower. It's just kind of like there's nothing going on, you know? So I grabbed my number 10 round brush, the Escoda brush, and I painted in some big basic leaf shapes, just to kind of fill the page a bit. And I also felt like it needed a bit of splatter, just to make things a bit more interesting. So then I moved back to the fine liner again for some more hatching and actually doing some additional outlining of the flowers, just really loosely, not trying to follow the lines I put down before. I like it sometimes when I see sort of outlines and colours that don't match up, if you know what I mean. So like colours that's not quite inside the line. It just really gives things like a nice loose look. I then switched back to my Fide pen again, as I felt like I wanted to get some areas of heavy line in places. I'm always sort of like trying to step back and assess the balance in the sketch and also like the contrast as well. So I've got some blurry areas of orange at the top of the sketch and outside the outlines. Just again to give an idea of looseness. Maybe there's some more flowers back there somewhere in the background. And then I felt like the leaves needed punching up a bit, so I added some much heavier green into those areas. And the final stage, which was completely done on a whim, but I think actually really makes this sketch something quite different, is I picked up my blue Posca paint marker and just started adding some more loose outlines and a bit of hatching. And I actually really think this blue balances out the orange really nicely and just adds something a bit unexpected to the sketch. I'm pretty sure this is probably not to everyone's taste, but this is actually my favourite sketch of the 3, and a style and direction that I actually wouldn't mind exploring further in the future. And this is exactly what this type of exercise could do for you too. It's such a great way to explore different styles, and I feel like something like a crane flower, it has such a distinctive shape, but it also has lots of bright colours involved, so it's just a really fun subject matter to play with. So I know it's not my usual subject matter, but I hope this was interesting and also inspirational. Please go ahead and try this out for yourself. I hope it brings you lots of epiphanies. And don't forget, I've got loads more inspirational experiments over on Patreon. I create a demo each week based around a theme for the month. Come join us over there and blow your sketching skills wide open. And also don't forget, guys, I've got a new ebook out, Sketchy Adventures in South Africa, a collection of sketches from 3 weeks of road tripping around South Africa. The link is in the description below, and I will see you in the next video.